So greetings to everybody. Welcome to the Future Trends Forum, our first session for the year 2017. Happy New Year to everybody. My name is Brian Alexander. I'm the host and your chief cat herder for the next hour. I'm very glad to see so many people here today. We have a lot to talk about, and I just want to wish everybody a very, very happy new year. So to begin with, if I want to make sure that you know that you are now inhabiting a new Shindig build. So this is the familiar interface with some interesting changes as we go. And I'll walk everyone through it just to give people a sense of how it works. So why don't we start with the slides, introducing people. So if we can go to the next slide. So just to let you know, especially if you're new to the forum, that the Future Trends Forum is a spin-off from the Future Trends in Technology and Education report. That's a monthly report. It's been going on for just about 5 years right now. And that takes a look at current trend lines in education and technology. It's a very condensed report. It's about 40% footnotes. It comes out every month and has been doing so for a while, so it's been tracking trends for some time. Please go to ftte.us if you'd like to learn more. You can download reports for free. We'd love to hear your thoughts as you go. The forum is kind of the live video conference vision of that. Now, next slide, please. You should know that the Future Trends Forum has started 11 months ago, and we've grown rapidly. We have had more than 1,300 people as guests and as participants, which is quite extraordinary. And it's important to know that they're from around the world. As you can see from this map, we are based in the US, but we have had participants from just about every continent, including Europe, Asia, South America, other countries in North America, and we are continuing to add more. So our ambit is the future of education at a global scale. Now, the next slide will tell us that we can only do this work with the help of some sponsors. And two of them I'd like to begin with. One is NYSERDNet from New York State, an organization that networks higher education across that state. We're very grateful to them for their help. We're also really grateful to Shindig. Shindig does two great things. They make available the technology, as you can see here, and they also make available wonderful people like Zach, Olivia, and Christopher, who do a great amount of work helping all the technology work, helping us as we run into glitches, and also working on the technology to make it even better. Speaking of which, let me just say a few words about the technology itself. Now, if you're new to this, you should know that at the very bottom half of the screen, you should see a bunch of different people. Sometimes the icons will be a silhouette. Sometimes there'll be a video feed of somebody looking at the camera and perhaps wondering why I'm talking about them right this minute. This is the audience room. This is where we have right now about 50 people. And they're broken out into individual rooms. So whenever you sign into the Shindig space, you're assigned a different room. And if you'd like to change rooms or poke around other rooms, click on the rooms button on the bottom left and you'll see a list of everybody else. On the top part of the stage, where I am and where the slides are here to my right, you'll see the stage. And this is where presenters are. And this is where our guest is going to be in just a minute. So everything we say, you guys can hear. But if you in the audience would like to peer up and talk to individuals, simply click on somebody else's icon. And if they would let you, you can have a bubble conversation. I think of it as a kind of cone of silence. Now, there are a few other bells and whistles you need to know about. And a lot of them are on the very bottom right corner of the screen. So if you take a look down there, you'll see three, I think that's teal colored, squares. One of them is the word ask. So if you click that, that tells us that you would like to ask a question. And if you do that, if your mic is working and your camera is working, you can come on stage and join us and talk with us, which is a lot of fun, easy to do, very exciting. If your mic and camera aren't working, or if you feel shy, or if your acoustics aren't good, that's fine. Click the raise hand button. That'll tell us that you'd like to ask a question. And you can click that, and you're typing a question, and it'll appear, and I'll read it out loud. You can also click the I am button. If you do that, you can chat to different people who are in your room. So right now, if I chat here, Adrianna, Elena, Brittany, Christopher, Farhad, Louise, Linda, Michael, Vicky, and one other person can chat right back at me. We've already been doing it. So those are all ways to interact. This is not a presentation-heavy situation. This is one that's based on conversation. And we have one more channel for conversation outside of Shindig. If you go to Twitter and use the hashtag FTTE, I'll put that in the chat box of my room right now, you'll see other conversation and questions, and you can ask a question there. That has the advantage of being exposed to the world, and I'll storify the results. So please take advantage of these. This is a very convivial, very conversation-oriented space, and we have a few different tricks up our sleeve today to show you how it works. Now, over the next slide, we'll tell you a few more things. This will tell you about this week's guest, the wonderful Adrianna Kezar. She's at the University of Southern California, the exact opposite direction of the United States from where I am in Vermont. She is currently a professor and co-director of the Center for Education, and also the inventor of a wonderful center on transforming faculty roles and student success. We're very, very excited to have her here today to talk about changing faculty roles and also some other possibilities for the future of education. So, Shindig folks, can you bring her up on stage?
Thanks, Brian.
Fantastic. Greetings.
Greetings to everyone.
How are you doing this afternoon or this morning?
I'm doing really well. Enjoying a lot of rain here in California. It's continuing.
Do you guys still need it?
We still need it.
Okay. Well, good. Well, welcome. I'm really glad to see you. To get started, can you tell us a bit about what your project on changing faculty roles is about? What kind of organization is it, and what does it do?
So my work actually began in looking at some that connects to this Future Trends Forum. I've done a lot of work on how can we think about improving higher education, so new pedagogical approaches and the ways that we can support students from different backgrounds, first generation, low income, underrepresented minority students. I've been doing a lot of work over the past 20 years on how can we, colleges and universities do better and improve the work that we were doing. And as a part of that work, about 10 years ago, I always look at what are some of the constraints within college campuses that affect their ability to make these kinds of improvements. And for many years, I would hear about the reward structures in higher education and how those were affecting faculty members adopting new teaching methods. But instead, about 10 years ago, instead of hearing about reward structures or policies that were in place that were getting in the way of some of the faculty implementation of some of these strong ideas, I started to hear about, well, it's really hard to implement, this new curriculum change or this new pedagogical change because the faculty in our math department are turning over every semester, and started to hear about the problems of the rise of adjuncts and how that really was altering, the ability of faculty to be successful in some of the things that I had been studying and had been working on. So about 10 years ago, I started to also engage this issue of how is the changing faculty dynamics affecting student success, affecting really higher education institutions' ability to meet their mission of teaching and learning. What was happening? We were having a lot of, I'll call them unintentional. Other people see them as potentially intentional, but the way that the faculty roles were changing, they were becoming largely contingent. The trends 10 years ago, this really wasn't on the radar screen, even though the numbers were dramatically going up. Particularly the adjunct roles, but also the full-time non-tenure track. It's a smaller population, only about 20%. But now we have over 50% of the faculty, 52% in the latest statistics, are adjunct part-time, and 75% of the faculty are now off the tenure track. So the numbers have risen dramatically. There was not a lot of attention to this change that was going on at the time. So the role of what's called the Delphi Project on the Changing Faculty and Student Success was both to draw attention to, just to make people aware of the fact that these changes were going on because they were largely not being discussed, partnering with media organizations like the Chronicle or Inside Higher Education to get more focus on this issue, to work other researchers to understand the implications of this work. And then at the Delphi project, we have been then both conducting research and collecting research that examines what is the effect on student learning of moving to a largely contingent faculty, and how is this affecting faculty members' ability to be, available for students, to utilize the best teaching and learning strategies. And I call it really their opportunity to perform well in their roles. And as I see it, and as I've examined in my research, we as an enterprise are making it increasingly difficult for very bright, passionate people to be able to do to perform, to their optimal capacity, given the difficult constraints that are a part of the adjunct role. And I can talk about numerous kinds of issues, but one of the major issues, for example, is the late hiring process. Faculty are often hired days before a class, and how can they prepare a quality syllabus, get the materials ahead of time, think about assignments. There are literally dozens of difficult conditions, and we can talk about more of those, but just to outline, just the late hiring is one of those that really affects us as an enterprise to create that kind of quality learning environment.
Adrianna, can I interrupt just for 1 second? I have a quick question, and I just wanted to ask everybody else to think, whatever questions you have for Professor Kezar, again, there are all these different ways to ask them, and so feel free to post them to the chat box, click the ask button or the raise hand button, or head over to Twitter where there's already conversation happening. So one quick question I wanted to ask, you mentioned that our enterprise is making it harder for passionate faculty to perform. By our enterprise, do you mean American higher education?
It's actually a worldwide phenomenon. So now the casualization of faculty, as it's called in Australia and New Zealand, the Commonwealth countries, it's happening worldwide. It's happening to different degrees at different institutions. So it's happened rapidly in Australia. It's happened less rapidly in some of the Asian countries that were actually building up. They didn't have tenure track faculty, and they've been building them up. So it's happening unevenly worldwide, but it is a global phenomenon.
Thank you. I mean, thank you. That's a great thing to hear. That's a terrible thing to hear, but thank you for answering my question. While we're waiting for questions and comments from other people, let me ask you one more follow-up along that, which is, what do you think is driving the adjunctification of the professoriate? What are the major forces causing that historical transformation to happen?
Yeah, I've spent a lot of time looking at this issue because the claim is that it's all financial, that institutions have been forced into the situation where they have to hire more part-time adjunct faculty. That is part of the issue, but it really is not as significant an issue as has been described, or as the reason for the rise. Couple of bits of evidence about why that is not the case. First, over the last 30 years, money for instruction. So there's something called the Delta Cost Project that looks at where money in higher education is spent. They have shown that systematically money for instruction has gone down, while monies for other areas of the university keep going up exponentially. So we have incredible rises in the amount of different kinds of administrators that are being hired on college campuses. More money is going for certain student supports. And again, not that some of these areas don't need some of the money, but it's been a very uneven, dramatic rise in the cost in some areas, decline in instruction. So it's not as if we're saving money; we're spending it often in other areas. Additionally, there was a report that just came out by the American Institutes of Research. Yeah, and they demonstrated that the cost savings, supposedly that are supposed to go to making tuitions less and for students, that the money, again, that's redirected from hiring adjuncts is not gone into lowering the cost of institutions. It's just got redirected into other expenditures for the institutions. So I don't think cost is driving it to the degree to which is claimed. And another piece of evidence is that institutions, private institutions that don't rely on, say, state funding, when it's claimed that, oh, this is because state budgets went down, private institutions who have the money still are hiring significant adjuncts, even though they have the money to hire full-time tenure track. So there's a lot of evidence that this has just become a habitual practice versus a necessary financial one. I think that one of the drivers that doesn't get talked about is the fact that higher education institutions since, the 1960s in particular, but there's been an incredible massification of the enterprise. Our enrollments have gone up dramatically, and the types of institutions that have grown are teaching-based institutions, community colleges, technical colleges, ones that really are focused on a teaching mission. And the faculty itself, and that's one of the aims of the Delphi project, is to look at what does the future of the faculty need to be. And part of it is there became a disconnect in the last 40 or 50 years between how faculty are trained and consider and socialize themselves as researchers, and the enterprise being predominantly, I call them scholarly educators, though, focused on teaching. And because there was this disconnect, administrators began to hire adjuncts who they felt would focus on teaching. So rather than reconsider tenure track roles and tenure people for teaching, there became this larger disconnect between what institutions were trying to do or required to do in terms of teaching and the training socialization of faculty and how they were rewarded. And that's also led, significantly to this issue. So I think we really need to reconsider the role, the importance of teaching.
Adrianna, just a quick question, and then Mike Michalkis has a better question. The quick question is, when you say that we should think of faculty as scholarly teachers, is that a tweak on the old model of faculty as scholar teachers?
Yeah, I think that one of the unfortunate aspects of this split now that we have of adjuncts who do teaching and that they're not considered individuals who should, for example, there's not an emphasis on them keeping up on their disciplinary knowledge, on them, doing some kind of scholarship. It may not necessarily be original research. It might be scholarship on teaching. It might be scholarly application. So this is a lot of what some of you may be familiar with Ernest Boyer's work on Scholarship Reconsidered. We need to think about a much broader array of forms of scholarship. And this scholarly educator is the one that I think we need to have more emphasis on, and it would better support, again, the role than, say, adjuncts who, they aren't given the opportunity, the money, the support to do things like just go to their disciplinary conferences often. So that, I think, is going to have a cumulative disadvantage for us over time, because that type of knowledge and engagement is really important for the faculty members to maintain, their own sense of being a professional, as well as the way they can bring that to the classroom then for students.
That's a rich answer to my question. Thank you. And I don't know if you can tell, I'm nodding along every maybe my head is becoming a blur at your point. I want to follow up, but two people have questions. Can we bring up Mike? I want to say it's Michalakis. Let's see if his his microphone and his camera work. Okay, well, he's trying to get that together. We have another question, a text question. This one's from Rita Breidenbach. It's a really rich question too. If you guys should be able to see it on the screen, but I'll read it out loud to make sure that everyone catches it. It's headed Financial Issues and Full-Time Faculty. Administrator in this context is so often a dirty word. Times have really changed. Universities now need to fundraise, so you need staff and development. Students have different expectations for academic support, so you have academic and career counselors. Increasing issues around learning disabilities and mental health issues require new kinds of professionals. Can Professor Kezar comment?
Sure. So, and this ties into, again, reconceptualizing the faculty role. One of the things that happened, starting in the 1910, 1920, was we did have the rise of a student affairs profession, and and it dramatically started to take over more and more of what had been a part of the faculty role, advising, mentoring. One of the things that we have found, though, is that as we've enlarged that enterprise, when we look at student support, many of the first generation low income, underrepresented minority students, which are the largest growing populations, all of the research, they typically have to work. They have a lot of demands on their time. They don't have time for a lot of what we offer in terms of student services and activities. So we built up a part of the enterprise where many students, they're not taking advantage of it. So Vincent Tinto, who's a researcher on college retention and graduation, talks about how we have invested a lot of money, but there aren't students utilizing those services to the degree that they should be. And what we need to do is move back faculty into playing more of that advising and support role as they can. Because these students, the only time they have is maybe the 5 minutes after class to talk to a faculty member about questions they have, and they don't have time to go over to student support services. So I do want to challenge us as an enterprise about the use and investment in some of those services. A lot of the research shows that the students are unable to use that, and it would be better, again, redirected in the classroom where that is where they are looking for the support and have the time. Of course, though, we do have these other rising issues. I want to, also talk about the mental health issue. Recent surveys show that mental health issues, we're either better identifying them on campus or they're rising. So they've gone up from 8% that were identified to 30% of the students talking about having mental health issues. So those are real concerns, and we do have to keep reevaluating what support services we do on campus. But I think there needs to be a relooking. And when I say relooking, I think we need to relook at the faculty role, because I don't think it's designed best to support our institutions right now. But I also think our budgets in general on campuses are static. We keep accumulating more and more services and units, and we need to reevaluate. We cannot keep adding on. We have always been what they call an accretion model. Add another office and another office and another office. We don't go back and look at how do we fundamentally rethink some of our structure and budgets, and are these the ones that are most needed right now to support students and the enterprise? And I know we're not asking those kinds of difficult questions that we need to be. And I don't want administrators to be, as you said, a dirty word, because the Delphi project works directly with all sorts of administrative groups. So we are a coalition of presidents, provosts, deans, department chairs, and faculty, unions, disciplinary societies, students, everyone. It's really inclusive organization. But I have to challenge administrators sometimes, because and in the conversations with them, they too will admit that money has gone down for instruction, and they too are concerned about the move away from full-time faculty. And the research and surveys that I've done demonstrate that most administrators do believe we need many more full-time faculty, and that it's gotten out of control, the hiring of adjuncts.
Well, that's a nice, good moment at the end of a very scary disquisition. I have to say, Rita, thank you very much for that clarifying question. You really hit the historical moment very clearly. I think when people say administrator, they often think of C-suite officials. They don't realize the sheer number of non-teaching faculty, non-teaching staff who are so vital. We have another question before I go on. This is from Mike. And Mike, I mangled your name. I thought it was Michalakis. I guess you get to correct it for me. Michalakis. Very good.
A major state university on the East Coast in May. He was offered an adjunct position at his university as an undergrad, to help teach in class. So on one side of it, I was thrilled that they offered him that kind of a position. He has a regular job. That they contacted him. I guess they needed someone to help out. If I was a parent though of a student, I would be a little concerned that someone who was teaching my kid was a 22-year-old recent grad, as much as I think my own son is capable of doing it. So, that kind of thing, and I'm not, he's not even sure of why they do. Well, he has his own theories why they do it, and he's happy to do it. And this semester, he's teaching 2 classes as an adjunct along with the professor. That kind of thing is, if he was entering college as an 18-year-old, I would be a little concerned about that. And I don't know what your thoughts on that. And do you see it happening more in state schools versus private schools?
Good question.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the questions. Thank you for all of your questions. So I think one of the important issues to consider is how much training or support individuals are given. So we also have a lot of graduate research assistants who are in PhD programs that are teaching that sometimes are only 24 or 25 as well. Master students who end up teaching undergraduates. That's been a long time tradition at research universities.
Right.
And criticized fairly heavily the past 30 or 40 years in particular, because there were studies that demonstrated that a lot of the graduate students didn't have the same teaching capacities or capabilities. Again, it's uneven, but in a mass comparative, they did not have as strong of results for students or teach as strongly, use as strong of pedagogical practices. So I think the best practice is to have somebody who is fully trained in content and in pedagogy. And some institutions have great training for TAs, and sometimes the TAs, graduate students who are only 25, can be very quality teachers. So I think it's about our intentionality, about how much we put into it as institutions to support those individuals. But it's going to be uneven, right? So that model in general isn't going to produce as much quality, because for every student who's 24, who might rise to the occasion and be, has the potential to be the great professor at 24 as someone at 40, there are going to be several others who can't. So I just say it's not a great model to rely on, and that's been the problem as an overall. When I use the term enterprise, I just mean colleges and universities writ large in the country. So right. As an overall enterprise, to expand these models that we know aren't of the greatest promise or highest quality is what I'm nervous about and against. I would rather us use those models of faculty that are of the highest quality, that we know have the best potential for helping students. But I mean, I'm not somebody who's either hierarchical, and I do believe, in a more egalitarian, I believe different people can learn from each other. I think there are fantastic peer learning models where I go out to college campuses where there are juniors teaching freshmen in peer learning models, and they're helping them learn a lot. So, we need to, I think, be open and think about if they're well trained and strongly produced, some of these models can work well.
Okay, great, thank you.
I feel for you. That's cool. It's quite a combination of opportunity and threat at the same time. Adrianna, I wonder how often this is going to occur now. If we'll see more and more undergraduates and more pre-dissertation grad students who are going to be offered this kind of role.
Yeah, I think as a supplement, and that's how it's done in most of the, for example, state public institutions I'm doing. It's not the peer teachers that are doing the teaching; they're a supplemental form of teaching and learning. I think it can be really strong as a substitute for quote unquote all of the regular faculty. I think that could be troubling, but as a supplement, it's fantastic.
Well, that can be, and that's in many ways how the adjuncts were initially designed, right? For people to do on the side, professionals to teach one class, that kind of thing. Well, this is a good moment then for us to shift into a different mode that we've been doing for a year, which is called the mingle session. And this is when Adrianna and I climb off the stage and we get to mingle with all of you guys. And what I'd like to ask is if we could take 5 minutes and discuss, how are you seeing these trends playing out in your institution at your university, your college, your school, your library, your museum. How do you see the casualization of academic labor playing out? Are you seeing an increase in adjunctification? What's that like? So let's take 5 minutes, talk about that, and in 5 minutes, Adrianna will come right back and talk more. Now, if you haven't done this before, the technology is really, really simple. Just look for other people that sound interesting and click on them. If they would like to talk to you, your two icons will click together and you can have a conversation. 3, 4, or 5 people can pile on. Now, if you don't want to talk, that's fine. I mean, if you're shy or if your mic doesn't work or for whatever reason, that's perfectly fine. Just refuse any connection and you won't be forced to talk. Okay? Let's take 5 minutes and do that, and we'll come back together and see where we are. So, Shindig team, Zach and all, if you could take us off the stage, please. And there we go. Welcome back to the stage.
Thank you.
Did you get to connect with anybody during this mingle session?
I had a little bit of technical difficulty with my audio, so I didn't get a chance, but I'm hoping that we can get some more questions or hear from some of the other discussions.
There's nothing like invoking technical difficulties to cause technical difficulties. My apologies. My apologies. You were saying you had a problem with your mic, but you solved it. And then did you get to talk to anybody?
I didn't get a chance. I tried and kept connecting. For some reason, it wasn't working, but that's all right.
Well, we have to work on this on the technical side then, because we have a lot of great people here. Speaking of great people, we had a few questions that came in already. Zach, what's the first text question that came in? This is from Mike Malafakis again. He works at Columbia, and he wants to know if you saw value in bringing in people who have more practical experience into the classroom than your typical academic.
That's a great question, and one that often comes up because that was the original purpose of the adjunct. We have always had adjuncts as a part of higher education. They were a small percentage, usually about 10 to 15% of the faculty. They were in larger numbers in places like business schools and schools of education where, the professional expertise was particularly important for helping advance student learning. So we have a long tradition of the importance of practical experience for classroom learning. I absolutely think that it's valuable. I think that one of the things that I want to make sure everybody understands is that when I speak of the difficulties or the challenges in the rise of adjuncts, now that they're 52% of the faculty, it's not because anybody who's adjunct is less competent and doesn't have wonderful skills, including practical skills to bring to the classroom. It's really the problem is the working conditions that we've created around those roles. If they were created in ways that made it more possible for the adjuncts to execute their responsibilities and to have more time to work with students, for example, they could get even more out of that practical knowledge and experience. So I think that practical experience is equally as valuable to academic experience.
Quite true. And that goes way back in American history, arguably back to the founding of American higher education. Mark Hewlett from the West Coast, not too far from you, I think, in some ways. He wants to come up on stage. Mark, come up on, join us.
Great. Hi there. Can everybody hear me?
Perfectly.
Yeah, sounds great. Hi, Adrianna. I want to sort of, since I can't remember if Brian did, but I want to put a plug in for Adrianna's book, Envisioning the Faculty for the 21st Century. We just picked it up here and in the Center for Teaching and Learning at University of the Pacific, and we're really excited to be working through it. So my question is more of a thought experiment, and then sort of a follow-up set of comments. I guess I'd love to just hear your thoughts on this. So I've been thinking about sort of the potential, like a cost differential between the world we live in, where 75% the faculty are adjuncts, and this magical world where 100% of all university courses are taught by fully tenure track faculty. I'm wondering at first, do we have a sense of like what the cost, this straight up cost differential would be between those two worlds? And then given, and sort of having thought about that, right, and thinking about where we go and how we move forward, it seems that given the sort of financial structures and really complex set of incentives that are necessary to attract and retain students, climbing walls, new gyms, fancy things, really, my question is like, what measure of organizational change management and like financial change management will be able to make up that difference between our world and sort of the ideal world or whatever, we're looking sort of to achieve. So I guess that's sort of a broad set of questions.
Sure. So a couple things. So one thing is, though, that we've never had an enterprise that had 100% full-time, right? So I said there's always been about 10 or 15% of, on the other hand, though, I would argue with, is there any reason that we have historically paid adjuncts a lot less? I'm not sure there's a strong justification for that either. So one could say, potentially, if we were to make this a equitable enterprise, maybe we should reconsider that. But there's also a differential cost, even if we were to pay adjuncts equitably, because if they're not, if we continue sort of the part-time, they probably wouldn't have the same kinds of benefits. So there's actually a paper that hasn't quite been published yet, but is, I think, I had a chance to review it. It looks at the cost for this. There was a paper that came out a year ago that tried to calculate the costs for equitably paying and providing benefits for more faculty to adjust what they called the adjunct sort of injustice sort of movement that's been going on. So there was actually a group of faculty members. I think it was at Georgetown, if I remember correctly. Sorry, I'm blanking on exactly. So they tried to calculate the cost and said it would be, so significant that we couldn't pursue that option. But what this paper and many of it ignore is it did overcalculate the kinds of costs. So one of the things that I've tried to do is look at the actual cost. It's very complicated. I've tried to work with BUA, which is the Business Officers Organization. I've tried to get case study institutions and get funding for this. I have calculated the cost for better supporting non-tenure track faculty, like different sort of cost levels. And I looked at institutions that did fund it. So I have a document on the Delphi project that's called Dispelling the Myth about the actual costs of better supporting adjunct faculty to create a better quality teaching environment. But when you get to this whole issue of what is the actual budgetary changes, I cannot get, my hands on a set of data to answer the question. And I've been working with all sorts of economists, and like I said to you, there's two papers that exist right now. One that claims that the costs are astronomical, and another paper that argues that paper's built on a whole set of faulty assumptions, and the ballpark number would be one that would be, a 2 or 3% increase in higher education costs. So the pictures are so different, and I think the reality is probably somewhere in between, right? So, but I can't get institutions to give me data. I can't get the CUBE or anybody to give me the actual data to answer that. The best other case scenario that I can tell you about is there are a lot of hidden costs to adjuncts that nobody will talk about. The constant hiring and turnover, sort of the retraining. There's a whole lot of costs that aren't being identified. And I was trying to get, again, NACUBO or some kind of organization, CUPA, some of these ones that collect data about institutional costs, and CUPA does all the work on hiring and rehiring. I honestly, like I said, I believe it's in between. The reality is in between the two pictures. I think, but I can't give you still can't get access to this data that would give a more precise answer. So I know that's not the right. I know it's not the response.
Well, it tells us this is a direction for research to take, and tells us that in a world of big data, we should be pouncing on this really soon. Did you mention?
Thank you very much.
Oh, it's a good question, Mark.
And thanks for the plug on the book.
Absolutely, I just put it up on Twitter.
Oh, good.
Adrianna, have you had any luck with Nakubo on that data?
No, right now, I think, it's very hard. The budget side of this has been the hardest side for me to tackle because it's political. Like I talked about, opening up the budget to examination is a very political activity. The closest organization that's been able to do this is the Delta Cost Project, because they've done it in this very aggregate way. But that also means they don't get into the specifics that I was talking about, some of those hiring costs. So they're talking about very large numbers, just like the overall cost for instruction. So it's the global data is the best politically we've been able to get people to share.
You find, well, again, I would ask a question, but there's a great question, a better question coming from one of our participants. And this is from Melvin Wade. Zach, if you can put that up, there we go. Melvin has a political question, which comes back to some of the things that we've discussed earlier, which is that universities have been among the few reliable havens for cultivating liberalism. With the election of Donald Trump, storm clouds appear on the horizon for liberalism. What effects would you predict for the role of administrators, faculty, and students as a consequence of the Trump election over the next 4 or, oh my gosh, 8 years?
Right. So I predict, interestingly, that Trump is not going to be very involved in creating policies around higher education in particular. And in fact, while many candidates few candidates talk about education, there were no candidates in this term that talked about education in any detail. If candidates do talk about it, typically it slides to the side once other priorities emerge for them. One of the only benefits to this is that we often are not a target for any policy or any changes. So I think that the biggest threat right now at the Pullias Center that we're looking at is higher education reauthorization, which is coming up. And that would affect things like the Pell Grant. Like, could we have more low-income students have difficulty getting in because the Pell Grants become a target for cutting? And again, so I would see it under or federal aid. It's mostly going to affect some of the access to college issues. I think we're already seeing the climate effects, though, right? So versus some of these policy effects, maybe the reauthorization bill, but we are seeing the climate effects. So right now at USC, we're talking about what does it mean for a university to be a sanctuary. We just had a position paper come out of the Pullias Center. We were talking about how we can support our DACA students because we have, throughout California, of course, a lot of students who are undocumented and feel that this is not a safe climate for them right now. USC, in fact, has a lot of international students where I'm at and a lot of Muslim students. And so we are trying to create position papers about how to support these various student groups who really have been affected by the campaign and, potentially, obviously, the climate, that is the same climate that we will have moving forward. And so we're seeing it. I see it more as a set of climate issues right now than as much danger in terms of policy. Like a lot of times we're worried and, that a president might affect policies that would, impact many higher education institutions. Right now, I think we're worried about the climate on campuses for various students. And so, as I said, our policy center is trying to create conversations, convenings, and policy documents in support of what can campuses do given this climate.
Well, those are two different overlapping areas: the climate one and the financial aspect. But that's a terrific question. I'm really, really glad you asked. And I'm a little worried about time because we have another question that came in, and we are approaching the end of the hour pretty quickly. And this is from Michael Haggins. I'm pretty bad with names, and so hopefully it's not, I haven't totally butchered it. Michael wants to ask, does your research distinguish between in-class adjuncts and online adjuncts?
That's a great question. I have been looking at most of the data that I have access to does not disaggregate by online versus in class. So they would be combined in the data sets that I'm using. I do aggregate data from studies. So I've looked at some of the studies that look at, for example, levels of support for online faculty sometimes get more support because there's an expectation that they may not know some of the online formats. So they may end up getting more training, for example. So some of the difficult working conditions that I describe, they may be less so for some of the online faculty members, actually, because there is this anticipation that that new environment will bring challenges that would require some training and pedagogy and use of the platform. That's about the only distinction that I've been able to identify in the data so far. And again, it's not disaggregated typically in the data sets that are collected.
Well, that's a good question. That's an unfortunate problem. Thank you, Michael. That's something that, again, one takeaway from your discussion is that we really need to improve data. Well, let me ask you one final question, which is to look ahead a little bit at the next 4 years, maybe the next 4 to 8 years. Do you see any chance of casualization of academic labor reversing? Do you see state governments, for example, directing more funds to public education? Do you see private universities and colleges deciding to change this up, or graduate schools at Research One universities altering their position? Or is this locked in place?
So I do think that we are in a time period where we are going to see increased full-time roles, but they will probably not be tenure track. I think that there is a great appreciation for the challenges. Most of the research suggests that the problem is centered on working conditions that are most aligned with adjunct roles. And a lot of the research suggests that full-time, non-tenure track faculty have the ability to create an equivalent learning environment. So my guess is that will lead to, and because of some of the, traditional problems that I do outline in the book with that have been raised with tenure, that there are no incentives to improve teaching for ongoing. So my guess is that we will see longer term contracts being offered, things like 5 to 7 year contracts, starting with, faculty will come in, they'll have 1 to 3 year contracts. Once they prove themselves, they'll get longer term contracts. Is probably the future with, I think to help the enterprise continue to get talented people. I think we will also need, some form of benefits and other, kind of forms of security. So I do think we're moving towards that. I see a lot of institutions seeing this both because of the effect that they've seen it's had on student learning, but also because it's the moral or just thing to do in terms of an employment practice.
So perhaps we'll see tenure continue to wither and decline, but we'll see a shift from somebody part-time to full-time contract. That is progress. That is a better vision. But I'm so glad that you shared with us your vision and your data. We have so much to talk about, Adrianna, and I hope we can come back to visit you later on so that we can ask you more questions about students, about institutional change and capacity. But I wanted to thank you so much for contributing so generously over this hour.
Pleasure to be here. Thank you, everyone, for your questions, and thank you, Brian, for the conversation.
Oh, well, our pleasure, our pleasure. We're at the last minute, friends, so I need to wrap this up by pointing out to the next couple of events. So first of all, you should know that coming up, as we shuffle through all the slides, hang on a sec, the next week we will have Malcolm Brown as a guest, a good friend of mine, someone I've worked with for quite some time. He's the director of the EDUCAUSE Learning Initiative, or ELI. Malcolm's an extraordinary man, based in New Hampshire, and he'll be able to talk about the changes in learning management systems. He's been spearheading the Next Generation Digital Learning Environment Project. He has a lot to say about that, and he leads a wonderful organization. So please get ready for next week. I'll be speaking to you from the middle of the Mediterranean, so I'll be in a very different time zone and a different climate, but we will make it all work, and I look forward to your questions and comments. Now, also coming up, our book club is changing course. Over the past couple of months, we've been reading a wonderful book. We finished that up. And now, after a lot of discussion, you get to hear it first. Our next title is Paying the Price. This is a new, important book by Sarah Goldrack about financial aid, how it works and how it doesn't work, and how it actually seems to be driving income inequality. So we'll be reading that for the next month. So grab a copy in Kindle or in print and join us. There'll be more information about that on my blog. Now, I also have to say, if you'd like to learn more about the Future Trends Project, go to ftte.us. If you'd like to learn more about this technology, go to shindig.com. And if you'd like to chat for a couple of minutes, we'll be here for about 5 more minutes. Thank you all so much for coming. Thank you all to the Shindig staff. Thank you again to Adrianna. And if we don't talk to you now, we'll talk to you next time. Bye-bye.